So here's the podcast overview for Chapter 4 of the Serafino and Smith book, as well as for Modules 5 and 6, the physiological modules, including the cardiovascular system and the immune system. So let's go over those first. Again, just like your modules from last time, you're covering two different systems of the body and understanding their functions, first of all. So that's the first part with the cardiovascular system. How does it function? What are its major parts? So we're talking about the heart and we're talking about blood vessels. How does it all operate? You want to be able to explain how blood pressure works. What are the factors that affect our blood pressure, like stress or like the foods that we eat? What are the various types of blood cells and their functions? This is important because you'll see how these interact with the immune system when we're talking about things like white blood cells, which are largely involved in our immune response, but also red blood cells. Know about atherosclerosis, which is a hardening of the arteries. It's largely due to diet, but this is what affects the cardiovascular system when the arteries of the heart become clogged and it can no longer do its job. How is it developed? What factors lead to it? What causes this to happen? And then what's the impact of that disease as well as other cardiovascular disorders? You'll want to know what types of disorders affect the heart and how those come about. And we'll actually talk more about this as we get to the chapter on diet and eating and exercise. There we'll have some more discussion about how our diet affects the heart. Then the immune system, you want to be able to explain the function of antigens and the various types of them existing in the body. How do these work to keep us healthy and combat disease? What are the various organs? And I have that in quote because they're not really called organs, but they're the different sorts of pathways of the immune system. Be able to explain those and how they fight off illness and combat disease. What avenues does our immune system take for doing this? And then what are the first, second, and third lines of defense in the immune response, as well as what factors can weaken our immune defenses or our immune response. Things like lifestyle factors, diet, exercise, where you live, what kind of environments you're exposed to, as well as any types of biological agents like autoimmune diseases. What are the various kinds of autoimmune diseases that a person can get that would affect the immune system? Okay, so all of that is located either within the modules, which are found in Chapter 2, or some of it is actually explained in Chapter 4, which is why Serafino and Smith have you read these two modules of the physiological modules, why they have you read those along with Chapter 4, because there's information embedded in Chapter 4 when they talk about stress, where they bring up the immune system and they bring up the cardiovascular system. And so you want to have a good base knowledge of these two before you start. So as you're reading in Chapter 4, again, you'll notice how they say, hey, if you haven't yet already, read about the immune system or read about the cardiovascular system. Okay, then when you get into Chapter 4, we're really looking at the relationship between stress and all kinds of factors that relate to illness. So understand what is the relationship, the correlation between stress and illness and immune outcomes. What is type A behavior? And what is its connection to coronary heart disease? So type A behavior pattern has a lot to do with personality. You're going to find some things in the Longevity Project that connect there as well. Know about adaptation to stress. Adaptation to stress. How do we adapt to stress? Or can we? What do we do well when we try to adapt to stress, and what do we not do so well? And what is our body's response to that? things like PTSD, which is actually talked about a little bit more in the Longevity Project. You'll see some people, termites there, that actually suffered from PTSD. So that will tie that in some more there too. But what exactly is it? What is the body doing when someone is diagnosed with PTSD? What is social support? What does that mean? And what kind of role does it play in buffering the effects of psychosocial stress? So that could be relationship stress. That could be the stress of just dealing with your surroundings and your environment. Know about the various ways in which people receive social support, like what kinds of support is available. We tend to think of, just friends being there for you, but it's more than that. Like, what kinds of resources fall into the category of social support, and how would people use those different kinds of support? Not everybody uses it the same. We see gender differences. We see differences based on socioeconomic status, culture, etc. So be aware of those. Also be able to explain the direct effects hypothesis as well as the buffering hypothesis. These are two ways of explaining how social support helps, the role that it plays in stress. Also be able to explain why control matters to a person. You saw this with the video on stress, the natural portrait of a killer. Control matters, as in with the Whitehall study, where you saw that people who had low control had higher stress, right? So the chapter is going to talk even more about that this week, and talk about the research related to that. What happens when we feel that we have no personal control over stressors, and what benefits come from having control? Are there any ways that we can increase our personal control of stress? So what are some tried and true methods of trying to increase control during times when we feel like we have none? Also understand the difference between optimism and pessimism in coping. These are kind of mindsets we have when it comes to coping, and how these relate to our explanatory styles, our kind of general ways we see the world, and the way that we explain what happens to us. So when something happens to you, we typically have a certain reaction. That is our explanatory style. We tend to explain things in the same type of way, given different scenarios or different situations. So sort of understand that process. Also understand the concept of learned helplessness and its link to depression. What is learned helplessness, and how is it linked to depression? The concept of hardiness. What does it mean to be a hardy individual? And what factors play a role there? Emotional disclosure is a good thing. There are some really great health benefits when a person can emotionally disclose. What does that mean to emotionally disclose? There are several different ways we can do this, and how might it benefit us health-wise? What does it mean to have a sense of coherence in our buffering of stress? Also, here's where we map on even more with the Longevity Project, be able to explain how aspects of personality can pose a vulnerability to our health or make us more resilient. So here's a great objective that you can use to tie into your discussion this week when you talk about the Longevity Project and the termites. The discussion this week deals with being a moody worrier, being a little bit neurotic versus laid back. That's a personality trait. How can that pose a threat to our health, or how can it make us resilient? Know the 5-factor model of personality. So we're tying in more personality, and things like type A. I think I said that up there a little bit. But how does type A behavior affect our health? There's some more about this in the module 5. Cardiovascular system mentions that too. So that's another good place to bridge those a little bit. Be able to explain the diathesis stress model, which is basically a model that takes into account environmental variables and biological dispositions in how you manifest illness in response to stress. So you want to understand that model. Then the various pathways that lead to illness, such as the physiological changes that take place in the body. You're going to get a lot of this in the modules too, so that will be helpful. Explain the reactivity of particular systems of the body to stress. So, like I've been saying all along, there are certain systems of our body that just respond more in times of stress. The endocrine system, which shoots out hormones, the immune system, which prepares us or tries to prevent the effects of stress on our body so that we don't get sick or it's attacked during times of stress. And then the cardiovascular system, which can be sensitive to our behaviors and patterns in lifestyle during times of stress. Be able to explain what is the area of psychoneuroimmunology and how psychosocial elements can affect our immune system. This is, really something that was discovered, I would say, in the 70s and 80s, of just how our thinking, our thoughts, our emotions can actually affect our immune system. That there are direct pathways that have been established that show how connected or how interconnected our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings are with the pathways that our body uses to combat illness and stress during times of hardship, and how this translates onto our immune system. And then understand the psychophysiological disorders that affect the immune system, the respiratory system, digestive system, and cardiovascular system. There are specific diseases of these systems that are affected by stress, right? And they're usually considered psychophysiological disorders because they're not purely physical in nature. They can be brought on by psychosocial factors, things in the environment and how we feel about it and how we understand it and think about it. And lastly, be able to explain the connection between stress and hypertension, high blood pressure, and coronary heart disease, as well as cancer. And this is talked about in the chapter, but it's also touched on again in Module 5, which covers the cardiovascular system. Obviously, that's going to talk about hypertension and heart disease is the two primary ones that are covered here as well. So that's a lot of goals for this week, but a lot of it piggybacks and mimics what we talked about last week as we started to dive into stress. And this is really going to provide the framework going forward as we start to get deeper into health psychology. This is going to provide a nice base for you. So hopefully this will provide that good understanding.